Before there was Mystery Men or The Tick, there was Blankman, a superhero comedy so bizarre that it featured a washing machine robot, real sons playing flashback versions of their famous fathers, and a $30 million budget that somehow vanished faster than the hero's dignity. From Damon Wayans predicting his own movie in another film, to the strangest casting choices in superhero cinema history, this forgotten 1,994 gem hide secret's weirder than its bulletproof underwear costume. Fact 1. Real family acting dynasty. When Damon Wayans decided to cast the younger versions of the main characters in Blankman, he made a choice that would turn the 1994 superhero comedy into a genuine family production. Instead of hiring random child actors through traditional casting calls, Wayans gave the flashback roles to his own sons, creating one of the most authentic family connections ever seen in a Hollywood film. Michael Wayans took on the role of young Daryl, the character who would grow up to become the bumbling superhero Blankman, while 11-year-old Damon Wayans Jr. played young Kevin, the skeptical brother who eventually becomes the sidekick known as Other Guy. This casting decision meant that when audiences watched the childhood scenes of the Walker brothers, they were literally seeing the real-life sons of the actors who played their adult versions. The choice was particularly meaningful for Damon Wayans Jr., who was making his very first appearance in any film at just 11 years old. Born in November of 1982 in Vermont, the young actor was still discovering his own path in life when his father offered him this opportunity to step into the family business. The experience of working alongside his father and brother on a major Columbia Pictures production gave him his first taste of the entertainment industry that would eventually become his career. What makes this family casting even more remarkable is how natural and convincing the resemblance appears on screen. The young actors genuinely captured the essence and mannerisms of their older counterparts, creating a believable continuity that most films struggle to achieve with unrelated actors. This wasn't just a case of nepotism or convenience, but rather a creative decision that added an extra layer of authenticity to the film's family dynamics. The Wayans family was already well established in comedy through their work on In Living Color, but Blankman marked one of the first times multiple generations appeared together in a feature film, setting a precedent for future family collaborations in their entertainment legacy. Fact 2. Chris Tucker's Invisible Mall cameo. Chris Tucker technically appears in The Meteor Man, but you could watch the entire movie without ever knowing he's there, because his face never appears on screen. This bizarre cameo situation happened during a specific scene where Eddie Griffin's character Michael decides to impersonate the real Meteor Man at a shopping mall, creating chaos and confusion among the crowd of onlookers who can't tell the difference between the fake hero and the genuine article. During this mall sequence, there's an energetic master of ceremonies announcing the events and hyping up the crowd as Michael performs his unconvincing superhero act. The voice you hear belongs to Chris Tucker, who was completely uncredited for his contribution to the film. Tucker recorded his dialogue for this scene, delivering his lines with his characteristic high-energy vocal style that fans would later recognize from movies like Friday and Rush Hour, but the filmmakers chose to keep him entirely off camera throughout his entire performance. What makes this cameo even more unusual is that Chris Tucker was still a relatively unknown comedian in 1993, having not yet achieved the major stardom that would come with his later film roles. At this point in his career, he was primarily known for his stand-up comedy appearances on Def Comedy Jam, and was just beginning to break into movies. This voice-only appearance in The Meteor Man represents one of his earliest film credits, yet it's so hidden that most viewers never realize they're hearing a future Hollywood star providing commentary for one of the movie's more comedic moments. The decision to use Tucker's voice without showing him on screen remains unexplained, creating one of the most peculiar celebrity cameos in superhero movie history where the star is present but completely invisible. Fact 3. The superhero afraid of flying. The Meteor Man breaks every superhero convention by giving Jefferson Reed the power of flight while simultaneously making him absolutely terrified of using it, creating the unique spectacle of a hero who can soar through the skies, but chooses to hover just a few feet above the sidewalk because he's scared of heights. This acrophobia creates some of the film's most memorable visual gags, as audiences watch a supposedly mighty superhero who flies so low that he could easily step off a curb and walk faster than he's moving through the air. Throughout the entire movie, Jefferson never rises higher than about 10 or 12 feet off the ground, which means he's constantly flying at roughly the same altitude as a basketball player, making a jump shot rather than soaring majestically above the cityscape like Superman or any other traditional flying superhero. This limitation turns what should be his most impressive and liberating power into a source of constant anxiety and embarrassment as he awkwardly navigates around telephone poles, street signs, and low-hanging tree branches while trying to look heroic. The irony becomes even more pronounced during action sequences where Jefferson needs to pursue criminals or respond to emergencies, because his fear of heights prevents him from taking the most direct routes or gaining strategic advantages that flight should provide. Instead of swooping down from above to surprise villains or flying over obstacles to reach people in danger, he's forced to essentially float along at street level like he's riding an invisible skateboard, making him perhaps the least aerially impressive superhero in cinema history. This phobia also affects his confidence and effectiveness as a hero, since the very power that should make him feel invincible instead serves as a constant reminder of his limitations and fears, creating internal conflict that most superheroes never experience. Fact 4. Marvel Comics crossed over the character. Most movie tie-in comics are quickly forgotten promotional materials, but Marvel Comics took the Meteor Man far beyond a simple adaptation and actually integrated Robert Townsend's superhero into their official comic book universe. What started as a standard movie tie-in comic called Meteor Man, the movie evolved into something much more ambitious when Marvel decided to create a 6-issue limited series that brought Jefferson Reed into the mainstream Marvel universe alongside some of their most popular characters. The comic series, written by Burt Hubbard and Dwight Coy, with artwork by Robert Walker and John Holdridge, featured Meteor Man teaming up with Spider-Man and Night Thrasher in adventures that went far beyond the plot of the original film. This crossover approach was highly unusual for movie tie-ins, as most studios prefer to keep their properties separate from established comic universes to maintain creative control. Marvel's decision to fully embrace Meteor Man as part of their continuity showed genuine respect for the character and suggested they saw potential for ongoing stories beyond the film's limited box office success. The connection between Meteor Man and Marvel Comics didn't end with the original series either. Years later, the Golden Lords gang from the movie made a surprising appearance in the pages of Miles Morales' Spider-Man issue number 5, proving that elements from Robert Townsend's film had become permanent parts of Marvel's storytelling mythology. This long-term integration demonstrates how Marvel viewed Meteor Man not as a temporary licensing deal, but as a legitimate addition to their roster of heroes, giving the character a comic book legacy that outlasted the film's brief theatrical run and continues to influence Marvel stories decades later. Fact 5. The movie's massive budget disaster. The Meteor Man represents one of the most devastating box office failures in superhero movie history, with financial losses that would haunt Robert Townsend's career for decades. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer invested $20 million in the film, which was considered a substantial budget for 1993, especially for a superhero movie featuring a relatively unknown character and a director who had previously worked primarily on smaller independent projects like Hollywood Shuffle and The Five Heartbeats. When The Meteor Man opened in theaters on August 6, 1993, it faced immediate disaster at the box office. The film's opening weekend brought in just $2,643,091, which was catastrophically low for a movie with such a significant budget and wide theatrical release. The situation never improved during its theatrical run, and the final worldwide box office total reached only $8,016,708, meaning the film lost approximately $12 million for the studio. This financial catastrophe had severe consequences for Robert Townsend's directing career, effectively ending his relationship with major Hollywood studios who had been willing to give him substantial budgets based on his previous successes. Before The Meteor Man, Townsend had been seen as a rising talent who could deliver profitable films with important social messages, but the spectacular failure of his superhero venture made studios extremely reluctant to trust him with large-scale projects again. The disaster was particularly painful because Townsend had poured his heart into creating a positive role model for African-American children, but the financial reality meant that his vision of launching a successful black superhero franchise was completely destroyed by the film's unprecedented commercial failure. Fact 6. The film's multiple script rewrites mid-production. The Meteor Man became a chaotic production nightmare as Robert Townsend continuously rewrote the script throughout filming, creating a final movie filled with confusing plot holes and inconsistent character abilities that left audiences scratching their heads. Principal photography began on April 13, 1992, but the script was far from finalized, and Townsend found himself making major story changes almost daily as production progressed, resulting in a film that feels like several different movies awkwardly stitched together. The most significant factor driving these constant rewrites was the timing of the Los Angeles riots, which erupted in late April 1992. Right in the middle of filming, Townsend felt compelled to address the current social unrest happening across the country, so he began incorporating new scenes that reflected the racial tensions and community conflicts dominating news headlines. This led to the addition of a subplot where Meteor Man brings peace between the Crips and Bloods gangs, with members of the actual rap groups Cypress Hill and Naughty by Nature playing gang members who eventually work together to rebuild their community. These mid-production script changes created massive continuity problems, particularly regarding Meteor Man's superpowers, which seem to change randomly throughout the movie without any clear explanation. Sometimes he can fly confidently, other times he's terrified of heights. His ability to absorb knowledge from books works perfectly in some scenes but fails completely in others. His healing powers appear and disappear based on what the plot requires at any given moment. The constant rewriting also affected Jefferson Reed's personal storylines, including subplots about his relationships and fears that were partially filmed but never properly resolved, leaving viewers with a disjointed narrative that feels incomplete and confusing. Fact 7. The novelization contains missing scenes. The official novelization of The Meteor Man, written by Cliff Thompson and published by Scholastic Point, contains a treasure trove of deleted scenes and expanded storylines that reveal what Robert Townsend's original vision for the film actually looked like before studio interference and production problems forced massive cuts. Readers who pick up this book discover an entirely different version of the story that makes much more sense than the choppy, confusing movie that made it to theaters. The most significant missing element is a complete character arc where Jefferson Reed finally conquers his debilitating fear of heights, which is arguably the most important part of any superhero's journey toward becoming a true hero. In the novelization, Thompson describes detailed scenes where Jeff gradually works through his acrophobia, starting with small steps like climbing ladders and eventually building up the courage to fly at higher altitudes without panic attacks. This character development gives real meaning to his transformation from a timid school teacher into a confident superhero, but moviegoers never get to see this crucial growth because the scenes were cut during the chaotic editing process. The book also includes extensive material about Jefferson's personal relationships and backstory that would have made the film much more emotionally satisfying and coherent. Thompson's novelization features scenes exploring Jeff's romantic subplot with his ex-girlfriend Stacy, more interactions with his students that show why he's passionate about teaching, and deeper exploration of his relationship with his parents that explains their influence on his decision to become a hero. These missing elements reveal that The Meteor Man was originally conceived as a much more complete and well-rounded story before production problems and budget constraints forced the filmmakers to abandon many of their most important character development scenes. Fact 8. Don Cheadle breaking character. On camera. During one of the Meteor Man's most intense dramatic moments, a young Don Cheadle accidentally created one of the film's most unintentionally funny bloopers by visibly breaking character right in the middle of the climactic fight scene. Cheadle plays Goldilocks, a member of the villainous Golden Lords gang who sports a distinctive satin jacket and dangly earring, making him one of the more memorable antagonists in Jefferson Reed's neighborhood cleaning mission. The mistake happens during the final confrontation between a powerless Jefferson and the gang leader Simon, which should be one of the movie's most serious and dramatic sequences, as our hero faces his greatest challenge without his meteor-powered abilities to protect him. While Robert Townsend and Roy Fegan are delivering their intense dialogue and the camera captures what's supposed to be a life-or-death struggle, Don Cheadle can clearly be seen in the background, completely abandoning his tough gang member persona and goofing around like he's forgotten he's being filmed. Instead of maintaining the menacing presence that Goldilocks is supposed to project during this crucial scene, Cheadle appears to be smiling, moving casually, and generally behaving as if he's just hanging out between takes, rather than participating in the movie's climactic moment. This breaking of character is so obvious that it's impossible to miss once you know to look for it, turning what should be a tense, dramatic scene into an accidental comedy moment that reveals the chaotic, low-budget nature of the production. The fact that this obvious mistake made it into the final cut of the movie suggests that the filmmakers either didn't notice the problem during editing or simply didn't have the time or money to reshoot the scene properly. Fact 9. The MPAA rating controversy. The Meteor Man achieved something almost unheard of in Hollywood when Robert Townsend successfully convinced the Motion Picture Association of America to lower the film's rating from PG-13 to PG, going against the typical trend where filmmakers fight to avoid higher ratings that might hurt their box office potential. Most directors find themselves battling the MPAA to keep their movies from receiving restrictive ratings that could limit their audience, but Townsend took the unusual step of arguing that his superhero film deserved a more family-friendly classification. The original PG-13 rating was likely triggered by the film's subject matter, which deals with serious urban issues like gang violence, drug dealing, and the realistic dangers facing inner-city communities. The Golden Lords gang and their activities, including scenes with weapons and criminal behavior, probably pushed the content into territory that the MPAA felt was too intense for younger children without parental guidance. Additionally, some of the action sequences and the darker themes about neighborhood decay and social problems may have contributed to the initial higher rating. Townsend's successful appeal was driven by his vision of creating a positive role model specifically for African American children, who rarely saw heroes who looked like them in mainstream cinema. He argued that the film's ultimately uplifting message about community cooperation, standing up to bullies, and using your abilities to help others made it appropriate for younger audiences despite its serious subject matter. The director believed that lowering the rating would allow more families to see the movie together and help achieve his goal of inspiring children to believe they could make a difference in their own neighborhoods, making this rating change a crucial part of his mission to create meaningful representation in superhero entertainment. Fact 10. The 30-second knowledge absorption power. Among all of Meteor Man's unusual superpowers, his ability to instantly absorb the complete contents of any book simply by touching it stands out as both the most useful and the most frustratingly limited, since this incredible knowledge only remains in his brain for approximately 30 seconds before completely disappearing. This power creates both comedic opportunities and serious problems throughout the film, as Jefferson Reed discovers he can master complex subjects in an instant, but must act immediately before the information vanishes from his memory entirely. The most ridiculous demonstration of this power occurs during a crucial fight scene, when Jefferson desperately tries to gain martial arts knowledge to defend himself against the Golden Lord's gang leader Simon. In his panic, Jefferson grabs what he thinks is a Bruce Lee fighting manual and absorbs its contents, expecting to suddenly become a kung fu master. However, he accidentally picks up a fashion and runway modeling book instead, instantly filling his mind with knowledge about catwalk techniques, posing and haute couture rather than combat skills. The situation becomes even more absurd when Simon also touches the same book and absorbs the identical modeling knowledge, leading to one of the most bizarre fight scenes in superhero movie history. Instead of exchanging punches and kicks, both Jefferson and Simon begin strutting down the street like professional runway models, striking dramatic poses, and engaging in what can only be described as a competitive fashion show in the middle of their life-or-death confrontation. They voguing and posing at each other with complete seriousness, their newfound modeling expertise temporarily overriding their desire to fight, until the 30-second time limit expires, and they both suddenly remember they're supposed to be mortal enemies rather than competing fashion models. Fact 11. 5 future Friday stars appeared together. The Meteor Man served as an unexpected reunion preview for 5 actors who would go on to create comedy gold together in the 1995 cult classic Friday, though their roles in Robert Townsend's superhero film were completely different from the characters that would make them famous. Tom Lister Jr., who plays an intimidating gang member called Digit in The Meteor Man, would later become the unforgettable neighborhood bully Debo in Friday. Faison Love appears as Maurice, while LaWanda Page takes on the role of an old nurse, and John Witherspoon plays Clarence James Carter III, giving audiences an early glimpse of the comedic chemistry these performers would later perfect. Chris Tucker's involvement creates an even more interesting connection between the two films, since his voice-only appearance as the unseen mall announcer in The Meteor Man represents one of his earliest film credits before he landed the breakout role of Smokey in Friday. The fact that all 5 of these actors worked together on Townsend's superhero project 2 years before they created one of the most quoted comedies in film history makes the Meteor Man a fascinating piece of casting history that most viewers never notice. What makes this connection particularly remarkable is how different their roles are between the two movies. In The Meteor Man, these actors are spread across various dramatic and action-oriented parts, dealing with serious urban issues like gang violence and community organizing, while Friday allowed them to showcase their natural comedic timing and improvisational skills in a much lighter neighborhood-based story. The transition from playing relatively serious characters in a superhero film to becoming the ensemble cast of a stoner comedy demonstrates the versatility of these performers and creates an unexpected link between two very different approaches to African American cinema in the 1990s. Fact 12. The character named after real teacher. Robert Townsend's decision to name his superhero protagonist Jefferson Reed wasn't a random creative choice but rather a heartfelt tribute to one of his actual elementary school teachers who had made a lasting impact on his childhood and educational development. According to production materials held in the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences library files, Townsend deliberately chose to honor this real educator by giving his fictional superhero the exact same name as the teacher who had influenced him during his formative years. This personal connection adds a deeper layer of meaning to the Meteor Man's central theme about the heroic nature of teaching and community leadership, since Townsend was essentially creating a fantasy version of someone who had already been a real-life hero in his own experience. The choice to make Jefferson Reed a substitute teacher, rather than a full-time educator, also reflects the often precarious nature of working in urban school systems, where dedicated teachers frequently struggle with limited resources and challenging circumstances while still trying to make a positive difference in their students' lives. Townsend's tribute to his former teacher becomes even more meaningful when you consider that the movie's core message revolves around ordinary people discovering they have the power to transform their communities through courage, dedication, and a willingness to stand up for what's right. By naming his superhero after a real educator, Townsend was acknowledging that teachers already possess many of the qualities that define true heroes, even without meteor-powered abilities to help them fight crime and injustice. This naming choice also reinforces the film's emphasis on the importance of education and mentorship in breaking cycles of violence and despair in urban neighborhoods, making Jefferson Reed both a fictional superhero and a symbolic representation of all the real teachers who work tirelessly to inspire and protect their students. Fact 13. The film's anti-marketing battle. Robert Townsend found himself in an unprecedented public battle with his own studio when Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's marketing department created advertising campaigns that he believed completely misrepresented his film's intended message and target audience. The conflict erupted in the summer of 1993 when Townsend discovered that MGM was promoting The Meteor Man using what he considered stereotypical and offensive language that portrayed the movie as exclusively for African-American audiences rather than the universal family film he had intended to create. Townsend's frustration reached a boiling point when he realized that the studio's marketing approach was reinforcing exactly the kind of cultural limitations he had been trying to break down with his superhero story. He had specifically designed The Meteor Man to appeal to children and families of all backgrounds, believing that positive representation could cross racial lines and create broader understanding. The marketing language that MGM chose undermined this vision by suggesting that the film was only relevant to black viewers, effectively creating barriers that prevented other audiences from considering the movie. The situation became so serious that Townsend enlisted the support of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and together they launched a vocal public protest against MGM's advertising strategy. Both Townsend and NAACP representatives argued that the studio's approach was not only offensive, but also commercially self-defeating, since it artificially limited the film's potential audience at a time when the movie desperately needed broad appeal to succeed at the box office. This marketing controversy highlighted the ongoing tensions between filmmakers who wanted to create inclusive entertainment and studio executives who often relied on narrow demographic targeting, revealing how advertising decisions could either support or undermine a film's artistic and social goals. Fact 14. The dog telepathy subplot. Among Meteor Man's extensive list of superpowers, his ability to communicate telepathically with dogs creates some of the film's most unexpectedly touching and practical moments, particularly in his relationship with his beloved pet Ellington, who becomes both his confidant and his protector throughout the story. When Jefferson Reed first discovers this unusual power after returning home from the hospital, the audience witnesses their first conversation through subtitles that translate the barking sounds into actual dialogue, revealing that Ellington has been worried sick about his owner's mysterious disappearance and miraculous recovery. The dog telepathy power proves to be far more useful than many of Jefferson's other abilities, especially during a crucial scene where Ellington essentially saves his master's life through quick thinking and protective instincts. When dangerous thugs break into Jefferson's apartment while he's sleeping, Ellington immediately senses the threat and begins barking frantically to wake him up. However, when Jefferson doesn't respond quickly enough to the warning, the loyal dog takes matters into his own paws by physically dragging his owner out of bed and pulling him behind a sofa for protection. The scene becomes even more remarkable when Ellington goes beyond just hiding Jefferson and actually helps camouflage him by covering his body with clothes and other household items, demonstrating an intelligence and problem-solving ability that goes far beyond normal canine behavior. Throughout this entire rescue sequence, the audience can understand Ellington's thought process through the subtitled translations of his barks and whimpers, creating an unusual partnership dynamic where the dog often appears more alert and practical than his superhero owner. This telepathic connection also extends to other dogs in the neighborhood, giving Jefferson access to a network of four-legged informants who help him monitor criminal activity throughout the community. Fact 15. The missing fear of heights resolution. The Meteor Man stands alone in superhero cinema as the only hero who never actually overcomes his greatest weakness, leaving Jefferson Reed perpetually afraid of the very power that defines his heroic identity throughout the entire film. According to both production trivia and Cliff Thompson's official novelization, Robert Townsend originally filmed multiple scenes showing Jeff gradually conquering his debilitating acrophobia through a series of increasingly challenging exercises that would have provided a satisfying character arc and emotional payoff for audiences. These deleted scenes reportedly included Jefferson starting with small steps like climbing ladders and tall buildings, then slowly working his way up to flying at higher altitudes without experiencing panic attacks that forced him back down to ground level. The novelization describes detailed sequences where Jeff practices his flying abilities in stages, beginning with short hops just a few feet off the ground, and eventually building enough confidence to soar above the rooftops of his Washington, D.C. neighborhood like a traditional superhero should. However, the chaotic production process and extensive script rewrites meant that these crucial character development scenes were cut from the final theatrical release, leaving viewers with a superhero who flies no higher than a basketball player can jump throughout the entire movie. This creates the bizarre situation where Meteor Man's signature ability remains his greatest source of anxiety and limitation, rather than a symbol of his growth and empowerment. The missing resolution makes Jefferson Reed unique among superheroes because his fear never transforms into courage, his weakness never becomes strength, and his character never experiences the traditional hero's journey of overcoming internal obstacles. Instead, audiences watch a superhero who remains fundamentally unchanged by his powers, creating an accidentally subversive take on the genre that probably wasn't intentional but certainly makes the film memorable for all the wrong reasons.